पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिः चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvasadbuddhimapnotu, sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and consciousness. And let us breathe out our anxiety, exhaustions. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. Come my way, my truth, my life, on page 12 of the book. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is Do you remember? one thing I see that everyone present here has remembered is about the change in timings. So that unless some of you came an hour earlier today, this question, do you remember? Was a question one of the elderly Swamis of our order used to ask. I didn't meet this Swami. He was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. His name was Swami Achalananda. And I heard about him from some of my elder Swamis who had met him. He passed away sometime in early 60s. And I've heard that whenever any of the monks, especially the monks of the order, or even devotees, whenever they would go to offer pranam to him, to pay their respects to him, almost always the first question he would ask them, mostly in Bengali or Hindi, he stayed pretty much most of his life in Benares. And the question he would ask them is, do you remember? Now, the first time visitors, you go and suddenly you ask, do you remember? Your obvious question is, remember what? But those who had met him earlier, and they knew what it meant. And the Swamis from whom I heard this story, they used to say that what he meant was, whenever any monk would go and to pay respects to him, when he asked, do you remember? The idea was, do you remember the purpose for which you gave up your hearth and home and renounced the world and become a monk? And whenever devotees would go, he would ask the same question, do you remember? In other words, do you remember when you took up spiritual life, why you took it up? It's a way of reminding ourselves of the ideals that we cherish and the ideals that we sometimes, for one reason or another, become forgetful of. And therefore, this question is very important. It's a kind of question that we don't have to wait for someone else to ask us. It's a kind of question that we can ask our own selves daily. Because forgetfulness is a major problem in life. And we forget, we know that it's a universal problem because we forget small things and we forget big things. We sometimes can forget to take enough quarters with us. So if you want to do parking and you want to park the car and you find you don't have enough quarters for it. Or you might go on a long drive and forget to fill the tank of your car. There may not be enough gas and there may not be a gas station nearby. When sometimes we can forget to take the trash out on the day. These are the kind of things that happen often. While cooking, sometimes we can forget whether we have put salt or not in the food. And sometimes we may end up not putting the salt at all or putting twice. Now, these kind of things occur on a daily basis. And we might think, well, yeah, I mean, that's a problem, but not like a life and death issue. But it's a problem of forgetfulness nevertheless. But just as it is possible to forget these apparently minor things in life, it's also possible to forget major things in life. Many of us may, if we look back at our childhood, at our teenage years, and generally we see that those are the years of our life when we are filled with this idealistic fervor. There is so much of idealism in it. And sometimes it's inspiring to think about our own childhood, about our own teenage years, and remember the great ideals and the great idealism we had. And then we look at our life now, especially those of us who are older, and then we might discover that a little bit of that shine of our idealism has kind of gone off a little bit. For one reason or other, we have had to make compromises in life, with which we may not have been too comfortable in the beginning, but over time, that kind of becomes a way of life. We have heard such simple, apparently simple maxims in life, such as the value of truthfulness, the value of honesty. In the Upanishads, there is this well-known quote, which is actually was adopted by the Indian government after it became free from the British colonial rule. The motto that this free, newly freed nation in India they adopted, which is on the national logo, by the way, is called Satyameva Jayate. It comes from the Mundaka Upanishad, with the truth alone triumphs. Swami Vivekananda once said that 3 things are necessary for every person or every nation to become great. And among the 3 things that he mentioned, one was conviction in the powers of goodness. And that's the kind of question we can ask ourselves. How much convinced I am in the power of goodness, in the power of leading a moral, ethical life, the power of truthfulness. Because if I'm convinced in its power, if I'm truly convinced that truth alone will triumph, I would never want to compromise with it. But every time we compromise with truth, every time we compromise with basic human decency and honesty, we are showing that we are not convinced that that's the most valuable thing in life. So those simple things that we learned in our childhood, I think there was a book some time back that something similar, I forget the title, that all that I needed to learn in life, I learned in my kindergarten. And some of those simple things we forget. Now that's the kind of a forgetfulness as a problem. And those are the kind of things we need to ask ourselves, do I remember? Because if we take a time out and ask that question to ourselves, do you remember? Do you remember? We might be able to remember a lot of things which were a part of our own life at one point, but for one reason or other were pushed on the back burner. As spiritual seekers, of course, this is a major problem. Again, when we turn to spiritual life, we turn with its certain ideal. There's a great hope, there is a great idealism behind it. But then, think about the time when you began practice of prayer or meditation in a very serious way. The first few days or weeks are very exciting. But over time, it sometimes can happen that you do your practice, your prayer, meditation, and maybe in the beginning you're able to feel a certain amount of peace, a certain amount of a sense of upliftment. You begin to feel that, yeah, I think I'm making some progress. And that's exciting. But then, after a while, the kind of progress we seem to be making doesn't seem so clear. We just feel like we got stuck somewhere. And if we are not careful, if we are not somehow able to maintain that initial enthusiasm, then after some time, that daily practice of prayer, japa, meditation, can become another chore. Not very different from putting trash out every day or every week, or just eating your breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's like it's like this. Since we eat every day, it's not a very exciting thing because we do it every day. And I mean, no matter how good or delicious the food that is in front of you, after some time, we just think like one of the many things I have to do daily in life. Now, our daily prayer or meditation can become that way as well. Can be some people, some of the spiritual seekers can continue doing their daily meditation out of a sense of duty, just because if they don't do it, they feel a little guilty inside, but not with necessarily any great enthusiasm, not necessarily with any great hope, which was there when we began practicing it. So again, if we ask, do I remember the initial energy and hope with which I began this practice? And have I been able to retain it? Or if it's lost in some way, why has it been lost? And the answers we might get to the question, do you remember, may not always be very comfortable. And therefore, sometimes we may not even want to ask ourselves that question. But I think that's very important. The Gita, in the second chapter, discusses and gives a chain reaction through which we reach this point of self-forgetfulness in life. These are verses 62 and 63 in chapter 2. And the Sanskrit goes like this. Dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangasteshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho vijayate krodhat bhavati sammohaha sammohat smriti vibhramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. Translated, it simply means thinking of objects. By objects here is really meant thinking about anything that we should not be thinking about. People get attached. Through attachment comes desire, and through desire emerges anger. Once we are attached to something, we either want it, we want to have it, or we want to run away from it. Attachment can be both ways. And so we can be attached to things through love. We can be attached to things through hatred as well. Attached is just a connection we established with an object, whether I like it or dislike it. Now, whenever there is an obstruction in the path of fulfilling my desire, I get angry. And that's how desire leads to anger. Through anger comes confusion. We have seen this before, that when we are about to get angry, we haven't become angry yet, it's kind of just about to get angry. At that time, we are aware. It's like this, if someone is irritating you, someone is upsetting you, someone is kind of making you mad, for a short while, deep down, you have the feeling, I'm getting irritated. This is not good. I'm about to get angry. But once that threshold is crossed, we become angry, then that moment of awareness is lost. That time then I'm no longer aware of my anger. I have become anger myself. And when I become anger myself, I have no control over myself. That time I do not know what I will say, what I will do. And then later on again, when we become aware, then suddenly we realize, and then there is a lot of moments of regret. Oh, I shouldn't have said this. I shouldn't have done this. So that's how through anger comes confusion. That's what krodhat bhavati sammohaha. Sammoha means confusion, because I'm not in control of myself. I do not know what I'm saying, what I'm doing. And through confusion comes loss of memory. So that's where this loss of memory comes from. It all begins with engaging ourselves with things, either physically or mentally, with which we shouldn't be engaging, which is not what is in harmony with our aspirations, with our hopes, with our ideal. That then leads to desire, that leads to attachment, that leads to anger, anger leads to confusion, and it's confusion in the mind that leads to forgetfulness. And then the Gita goes on to say, through the loss of memory occurs the loss of discernment. Once discernment, buddhi nasha, once I lose sense of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, through the loss of discernment, people perish. But perish is meant we then are completely lost. We don't know then what to do, what not to do. Now, the good thing about this is that this is not a one-way traffic. In other words, by perishing is not meant that you're lost for eternity. That at any point during this chain reaction, we are able to recover ourselves. But it needs effort. It's like if I'm being pushed in one direction by a flow, then it's much easier to go with the flow. But if I have to flow against it, I need to use my willpower. I need to exert myself. So once I get into this chain reaction, it's very easy then, from attachment to desire to anger to confusion to loss of memory, it's very easy to go that way. But I can stop the process at any point by actually going against it. But that needs effort. And that's what spiritual struggle means. Spiritual struggle is a continual struggle, because if we don't struggle, if we don't assert our being, if we don't assert the ideals for which we stand, then we are just going to get dragged along this chain. The difference between what we normally would say a spiritual seeker and a worldly person or a materialistic person is, a materialistic person may have their struggle in the material world, but from a larger picture, they are just following this unconscious stream of life, going along the same chain of desire, anger, and so on. And we see that most people in most parts of the world follow the path of least resistance, and that's how their life goes. Now, a spiritual seeker is often referred to in Vedanta text as a dhira, as a brave person, as a courageous person. And that's why Vivekananda often quoted this text from the Upanishad, which says, Nayam Atma balahinena labhyaha. This Atman, the spirit, cannot be reached by the weak, by the cowardly. So, if we think we need courage and strength to survive in this world, we need a much greater courage and strength to achieve something in spiritual world. So spiritual life is not a way of escaping, not a way of running away from challenges. A spiritual life is a life where one is willing to face even greater challenges than the kind of challenges we may face in daily life. And that's why spiritual life can be frightening in some ways. We can see that the initial allure, the initial attraction of leading a spiritual life, of meditation and prayer, and sometimes, not everybody feels like that, but even those who feel that way, after a little while, as I said, that initial enthusiasm wanes. And sometimes people can just stop meditating because either they find that, well, I haven't become enlightened after meditating for a week, so there is nothing in it. Or sometimes people may also find that when they start meditating, their mind becomes even more disturbed than before they were meditating. So sometimes people feel, and sometimes many of us may have discovered it in our own lives, that after we took spiritual life seriously, we had many more doubts and questions, the kind of doubts and questions we never had before. And it might seem like life was much better before I tried to become spiritual. Now, so this is important to know. If I like spiritual life, if I want to be a truly spiritual person, don't look for peace immediately. Don't look for quiet immediately. It'll come. In some level, it will be better than before. But if that's what you're looking for straight away, then spiritual life is probably not the best first step. Because, and this is important, if all that we seek is peace of mind, we don't need spiritual life really.
We don't even need religion. Just leading an honest, ethical life of truthfulness, honesty, we can get peace. So don't think that those who are atheists or those who don't believe in God are automatically disturbed people or immoral people. They don't have to be. So it's possible not to believe in God, not to believe in religion, but be very honest, be truthful, be unselfish, and you can experience a peace in life. So if peace is all that you seek, then that's the first step. In fact, even if we want spiritual life, ethical life is the first step, because we cannot be spiritual unless we are first moral and ethical. Sometimes what can happen is this, that there are a lot of unresolved doubts, questions in the mind, but because I have never tried to delve deep into my own mind, I don't even know all the doubts and questions and conflicts in my own mind. Because most of our life is lived very superficially. We don't look beyond a few days ahead, or maybe a year or two, or maybe a few years. We don't ask more basic questions about, well, what's the purpose of life? Where did I come from? Where will I go after death? Well, most of us don't even want to think about death. Although we know as we grow older it's going to come one day, but we don't want to think about it. It's a little, sometimes they say an ostrich, when it's faced with danger, it just kind of sticks its face inside the hole and imagines I'm very safe. We are sometimes like that. We might sometimes think, well, I don't have to think about death, and then the problem is solved. No, it's not solved. It's there. It's just that I won't be prepared when it comes right in front of me. In any case, this has been the experience of people who have begun to meditate, that when they started to meditate, after the first few days, if they have really tried to peer down inside their own minds, some of the slush which was in the mind, which had remained at the bottom and remained in the unconscious, gets stirred up. And then it starts coming up. And then you find, oh, forget peace of mind. There are a lot of doubts and confusions and all of that. Now, and a lot of people are frightened. But if someone is very serious and says, no, and that's where Shraddha or faith comes in. I know this is the right way to go forward. I'm not afraid of the challenges that might come. And if someone has the patience and the faith to stick through that difficult initial period, then they'll find that they're able to work through all that slush. And then a deeper kind of peace will come. A peace not simply through an ethical moral life, a much deeper kind of peace, that which the books speak about as peace that passeth understanding. Now that's a much deeper kind of peace than a simply good, honest life can give. Now that peace will come through a spiritual life, but not right away. That will need work, that will need struggle. So according to Vedanta, the basic problem of the human situation, the human condition in which we are, is actually the problem of ignorance. And there's another one chain that I have spoken of on earlier occasions. It begins with forgetting. It's a kind of an ignorance which seems to have mysteriously covered all of us. The generic term that is used in Sanskrit is called Maya. It's a little bit like clouds covering the sun. Right now, we don't really see too much sun outside. That doesn't mean the sun has gone on a vacation. It just means that there's such a thick cloud cover that the light of the sun is not reaching us as it would in as great intensity if the clouds were not there. So some kind of a cloud has entered between my own true nature, and I have now forgotten who I am. And according to this chain that is described in the Upanishads, it is this ignorance which leads then to desire, avidya, karma, karma. Desire prompts me towards activity, and then activity produces results. And results are, in terms of experience, either joy or sorrow. And that's why we find all of our life, we're just kind of going back and forth, things which make us happy, things which make us unhappy, sukha and dukkha, joy and sorrow. We kind of go back and forth. All that the Gita does in that verse is just flesh out this chain and show in a more details how exactly that descent from that state of perfection and joy occurs to a present state of not quite a fulfilled life. Now, if that's the problem of forgetfulness, then the problem of forgetfulness can only be solved by recovering our memory. So, how do we recover our memory? And that's described in an Upanishad called the Chandogya Upanishad. This is how the Sanskrit portion goes. Ahara shuddhau sattva shuddhihi sattva shuddhau dhruva smritihi smriti lambhe sarva granthinam vipramokshaha. It simply means when the food is pure, the mind becomes pure. When the mind is pure, the memory becomes strong. When the memory is strengthened, all the knots of the heart are completely destroyed. Simple. First, make the food pure. A pure food will purify the mind. And when the mind is purified, the memory becomes strong. Again, all kinds of memory. Memory of the small little things about taking enough quarters if you want to go and park, but also a larger kind of memory about the purpose of life, about what the goals of my life are, what even if I've chosen some career, what is it that drove me to make that choice? And am I remaining true to the values I had when I began on this quest? So let's look at it little by little. So when the food is pure, the mind becomes pure. The Sanskrit word for food here is ahara. Now, two great philosophers in the Vedantic tradition, one was called Ramanuja and the other was Shankaracharya. Now, Ramanuja describes food. He says, what are the kind of defects a food can have? What are the kind of things that may affect the purity of food? And so according to him, the food has three kinds of defects. Any kind of food has three kinds of defect. The first is the kind of thing that most of us can understand. He calls it nimitta dosha, means the physical impurities in the food. The food is exposed, there is a lot of dust and dirt in it. If there is things in food which shouldn't be there, then obviously it's not pure. That's understandable. But there are two other kinds of defects in food which might sound strange to some ears. One is called the nature of food, called jati dosha. Now, according to these people who have done research on what kind of effect different foods have on our body and mind, they have found that certain kinds of food are not very congenial for quieting the mind. And among the things that are often mentioned in books are things such as onion, garlic, and so on. And sometimes you'll find a more elaborate list. What is meant is simply this. They have found by nature itself, some of these foods, if you take, the mind kind of get more excited. The mind become more restless. So if you have had a lot of this just before meditation, then you can blame it on your onion and garlic. Although that probably more other serious reasons why your mind is not being settled than simply the onion or garlic. And there is a third defect, which can be even more mind-boggling. It's called ashraya dosha, the source of the food. And it means that who is the person, how many people have had contact with that food before it reached you? The person who cooked that food, the person who served you that food. Now, according to this way of thinking, whoever has handled that food before it reaches you leaves a certain kind of an influence on that food. Now we might think, well, you go to a restaurant and you eat, you have no idea who has cooked that food, who has brought it to your table, what's the state of the mind of the people who made that food. And well, according to this way of thinking, we are consuming it and we just seem to be fine. In fact, sometimes restaurant food seems to be much more tastier and better and nourishing than other kinds of food. Now, what it means simply is this, that we would know about these different influences on the food only when our minds have become sensitized, we have become more sensitive to these things. If I'm, sometimes we say it's a little bit like this. People who are thick-skinned, you just kind of scold them, it doesn't make any impression. But if someone is sensitive, you don't even have to scold the person. Just a kind of a dirty look is enough to make that person upset. And so sensitivity varies from one person to another. Now, sensitivity to food also varies from one person to another. We read that in the life of Sri Ramakrishna and many of these great saints, that their minds had become so pure, their whole body-mind system had become so sensitive, so filled with sattva, that it was not enough just to make sure that the food was free from dirt and everything. They found that even if the person who had carried that food or cooked that food didn't have a good character, these people were not able to touch that food. We see that, we read that, and sometimes it's puzzling when you read that in the life of Ramakrishna. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to touch it. Now, that was not meant to be a kind of humiliating anyone or insulting anyone. It was just that he wasn't able to do it. His whole system had become so sensitive to it. So if we are not able to feel this right now, that does not mean that this is all simply an imagination, theoretical something. It just means that we haven't become sensitive yet. So that's, and one thing we know very clearly, that whatever food that we eat, a lot of the physical and mental growth that has occurred in us right from the time we were babies is obviously food is one big major factor. So a lot of the essence of the food has gone in building up our body and mind. And so what we eat is definitely a big part of who we are now, both physically and mentally. So the effect of food on our personality is undeniable. In how many ways it can occur, in what form it can occur, people can have different theories about it. The second philosopher that I mentioned, Shankaracharya, he takes not a different but an additional view of the word ahara in Sanskrit. Because literally, ahara means that which is taken in. Now, obviously, food is something that we take in. Now, what Shankaracharya says is that food is not the only thing that we take in. Clearly, food is something that we take in through the mouth. But we take all the sights through our eyes. We take in all the sounds through our ears. So our senses are also taking in things from the outside world. So even those things which our senses take in have to be purified as well. And that's then brings us to this idea that I need to have some kind of a filter along my senses, around my senses, by which I can allow only positive, healthy, good images to come and enter into me. I can allow only positive, healthy thoughts or work to enter into my mind. I can allow only positive, healthy, good sounds to enter into my ear. If we can exercise that kind of discernment with regard to the sensory inputs within us, then that is another way of strengthening our, purifying our mind. Now, in the times in which we live, many people increasingly have become conscious about eating healthy foods, which is why there's a big market now for everything that is organic. But how much of the sensory inputs that we take in are also organic? There is no, what is this, FDC, FDC? FDC certification? FDA. FDA certification for all the sensory input that we take. And that's why we have to create our own certification for it. Now, a spiritual seeker, therefore, is not only to be careful about the food that he or she eats, but about the food that all the senses eat. And one of the let's see if I get the right word, asymmetries, if you like, or the, okay, I'm not getting that word. Well, let me explain in a more elaborate way rather than explaining in one simple word. It's like this. While both of these are important, but because food is something tangible and visible and can be seen, sometimes religions have spent a lot more time emphasizing the kind of food that can be eaten or cannot be eaten. So that we have all these do's and don'ts about foods. Well, this food is kosher, this is not kosher, this is approved, this is not approved, and so on. But because it is difficult to measure and quantify the sensory things that are going in, it's not been emphasized and talked about so much. And that's a problem. So if I'm only careful about just the food that I eat and not careful about the things that my senses are eating, it doesn't really matter. Some people think that just being a vegetarian itself is a very great spiritual thing. Probably not. Some of the greatest rogues in history was vegetarians. So don't think of vegetarianism as something that automatically makes you very spiritual. So a lot more emphasis has to be given, according to Vedanta, on the things that we take in through our senses. So both the explanations of food, and not just that which is taken through the mouth, but that which are going in through the senses, they are both complementary explanations by these two philosophers. Now, in order to be vigilant, so we need to be vigilant about what we take in to the mouth as well as to the senses. And in order to be vigilant about what is taken in, we have to remain awake. Since all of our mistakes occur in life only when we are complacent and we are careless. Think about it this way. The mistakes that we do in life, if they're done out of pure ignorance, that you were awake, you knew what was going on, you were alert, but you were just ignorant. Okay, those mistakes, I think, are fine. Because if I'm alert, if I'm vigilant, and it's just ignorance that made me do some mistake, then when I make the mistake, my alertness will tell me it was a mistake. And if I was truly alert then, I would be be careful not to do the same mistake again. But if I do the same mistake again, means I wasn't alert to begin with. So making mistakes through ignorance, fine. So that's why this 3 strikes and you're out was a problematic thing, but the first strike in your ignorance, that's okay. But the second mistake, second time I do the same thing, then I need to recognize, well, I wasn't alert. And you will see that, yes, sure, we make mistakes in life out of ignorance, but we make a lot more mistakes in life, not because we don't know what's right, not because we don't know. It's sometimes we know exactly what should be done, what shouldn't be done. But there is a kind of a momentary forgetfulness that occurs. At that moment, we forget what's right or what's wrong. Worse, sometimes at that moment we think we are alert, but our mind tells us somehow that is the right thing to do. So that's when the mind is no longer our friend. Our own mind becomes our enemy because it justifies to us what shouldn't be done and tells us it's something that should be done. So it's carelessness, complacency that leads to mistakes. And in order to not be complacent, not be careless, we need to remain awake. Now, the basic practice for spiritual seekers is really staying awake, remaining awake. So, Buddha, the word Buddha means one who is awake. Now, we have to be all practicing Buddhas. We haven't So every time we are making an effort to remain awake, we are all Buddhas in the making. We are all struggling Buddhas. And when we forget, we have abuddhas, if you like. We have kind of fallen asleep. So throughout the day, we have a chance to be a Buddha as long as we are awake. And a time will come, maybe one day I'm awake for only 5 minutes. I was a Buddha for 5 minutes. Rest of the time, I wasn't. But if I keep on struggling, I may be able to extend that duration. And then maybe today 5 minutes, then 10 minutes. A time will come when I'm able to remain awake 24/7. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, then I have become then a permanent Buddha. So right now, we can begin by being at least part-time Buddhas. That's what spiritual life is. Now, on a daily basis, we are already making effort. Those of us who have some kind of a daily spiritual practice, we are kind of trying to be Buddhas. So when we do our daily prayer, worship, japa, meditation, now if I'm doing my daily japa meditation mechanically, I'm not a Buddha. But even if I'm meditating 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and during those 15 minutes, I'm trying to remain alert, I'm trying to be fully aware of what I'm doing, I'm fully aware of the movements of my mind, fully aware of remaining focused on my ideal. To the extent I succeed in doing so, I am a Buddha at that time. So don't think that being a Buddha is some kind of a thing that will going to occur, if at all, after a long, long time. Actually, we can become a Buddha even now, this very moment, if I remain alert and vigilant about my ideals in life, about what I should do, what I shouldn't do. Again, this is not simply about prayer, worship, japa, and meditation. Because that's surely, many of us do that. But that takes only a few minutes, maybe a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the evening. A much larger chunk of our daily life is not devoted to japa and meditation. Is devoted to time that at our workplace, the work that we do, the time we spend with our family, with our friends, and carrying out the daily chores. Now, to the extent I find a way of converting every work into kind of worship, or an occasion, by worship I mean an occasion to remain in touch with my spiritual ideal. That every little work that I do, it doesn't have to be any big work, big in the sense like something in the public eye. Even if I'm vacuuming my room, even if I'm cleaning my courtyard. Of course, if you're doing your work at your office, at your workplace, in school, college, wherever, if I can find a way to stay in touch with my spiritual ideal at some sub corner of my mind, then I can remain awake even in that kind of activity. And then one other very helpful practice that I've often and often referred to is reviewing the day's activities at the end of the day. Before you go to sleep, if you can just kind of run through whatever happened that day in a kind of a fast forward mode, just to kind of review the events of that day, that's very helpful also. Then we will know how much of my time throughout the day I was awake, how much of the time I was complacent, how much I was careless, what are the kind of mistakes I did, what are the kind of right things I did. That kind of a daily review is very helpful in order for us to make sure that we are on the right track. Because it is so easy. That's the problem. It's so easy to take an exit. It's so difficult to remain on your route. And so if I can do it daily, I will know that I haven't taken any wrong exits. Of course, as you know, if you take a wrong exit, there is a way to get back onto the interstate highway if you have kind of veered out of the highway due to a long exit. It's just waste of time. Sometimes just take time. But if I can stay the course, then my spiritual progress also will be quicker. So just as it is possible to do or remain awake daily through these things, we can try to remain awake through periodically looking back at our lives and taking stock of where we are and what we need to do going forward. And as I said, doing it annually is wonderful. Maybe New Year Day or maybe your birthday. Even as everyone is celebrating that you have gotten a day older, it might be just good to look back at that one full year that has gone and to see, how do I want my next year to be? Do I want to be exactly the way it was, or do I want it to be a little bit different? And if I want it to be a little bit different, what do I need to do now going forward that somehow the year ahead will be in some measure better, stronger, something more fulfilling? So, this kind of a daily or periodically looking back at our own life, we will see that it's much more easy, much more useful to, to remain awake and vigilant. If I remain awake and vigilant, I will tend to be less forgetful. And if I tend to be less forgetful, then all of these problems that occur will become gradually less and less and less. So that's the great value of a question like simple question like, do you remember? So if you have a very close friend of yours who shares your ideals and values, you can help that friend by asking that friend, do you remember? And tell the friend, please ask that question to me every day or whenever you meet. Or easy, if you don't want to depend on your friends to do that for you, you can ask that question yourself. Just every day, just say, do you remember? Do you remember? And as I said, this is a very simple question, but the more often we ask this question to ourselves, we will begin to see very tangible results. Don't think that results will take a few years or something. Just start practicing from today. You will find within a week, I can guarantee you that. If you ask this question to yourself every day, at least once, within a week, you yourself will find a little bit of a difference in your life, a difference that will make you happy, a difference that somehow you will feel, I should ask this question to myself more often. So that's it. Do you remember? Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Next Sunday, our subject will be a doing dialogue. On Wednesday, we will continue with the study of the Gita. Presently, we are studying chapter 17. That will be at 7:30. This Tuesday, we will not have a meditation, since all of you would be tired after voting in the morning. So there will be no Aarti and meditation in the evening, but we'll have meditation on Saturday as usual. So you're welcome for all of these programs. We'll conclude with the prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.